anyone's approval. When the city of Ashford was still shrouded in the early autumn mist, I quietly closed the door behind me, carrying a backpack stuffed with memories and a wound in my chest that would never heal. They were still asleep inside the old house where I grew up, and I left without saying when or if I'd ever return. My younger brother, Logan, had just received a brand new car as a graduation gift, while I was handed a rent bill for the very place I'd cleaned, cooked, and quietly lived in for 23 years. That paper still sat on the kitchen table next to the toast I made for everyone last night, but I also left a letter, not a farewell, but an indictment of everything I had endured as the daughter of the Bennett family. If you think family is the safest place in the world, my story might make you question everything you once believed. And I want to ask, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below, because maybe somewhere out there, there's someone who's felt invisible just like me. As a child, I used to think that the old house on Maple Street with its ivy-covered windows was the safest place in the world. It was the house my father, Robert Bennett, would proudly show off to anyone who visited. A gray-tiled roof, a rose garden neatly trimmed by my mother. Outsiders would see the Bennetts as the model family of Ashford. A father who was the CEO of the largest building materials company in the area, a mother who was the picture of grace at every church gathering, a smart and handsome youngest son who stood out everywhere from the classroom to the basketball court. And then there was me, Ella, the eldest daughter, a faint pencil mark in the perfect portrait they painted. I still remember that flutter of hope as a little girl, standing outside my father's office door, clutching a test I'd take, hoping he would be proud, that he'd look at me the way he looked at Logan. But every time I knocked, I got nothing but a cold glance, a passing look, or a curt reply, "I'm busy, ask your mother." In the evenings, my mother would walk around the house, checking windows, stopping by my room only to remind me about the lights, never once sitting down to ask how my day had been. I learned early on to fend for myself, to count every dollar from my 2 part-time jobs, one at a small cafe, one at the old bookstore at the end of the street, so I could buy books and school supplies without bothering anyone. My family, believe it or not, had an unspoken list of things better left unsaid, like all those times Logan messed up, but I was the one who got questioned first. I still remember when Logan was 14 and secretly took Dad's truck keys, went for a joyride, and scratched the side of the truck. Dad didn't scold him once. He just turned to me, eyes sharp as glass. "You're his sister. Why didn't you watch him? Where's your responsibility?" All I could do was lower my head in silence, even though I'd worked late that night and only got home after everything had happened. Mom just gave a faint, dismissive smile. Ella has always been irresponsible with the family, and quietly cleaned up the mess behind me. Maybe the deepest pain wasn't even in the accusations, but in the cold, silent indifference. Those family dinners where every conversation revolved around Logan's achievements, the school basketball championship, the partial scholarship to Oregon State, or simply the new suit Mom picked out for him for the gala. I sat at the end of the table trying to join in, but whenever I spoke about my little projects or the first online order for my handmade jewelry, Dad would glance over his glasses, shake his head. "You're still dreaming. When will you start doing something serious?" Mom was always too busy to listen. A daughter shouldn't care too much about a career. Focusing on the household is more important. Logan never had to do anything for himself. He got to choose new clothes, had his own car to drive to school, and was rewarded for even the smallest achievements. The only time I ever saw him get in trouble with Dad was when Logan was kicked off the basketball team for getting into trouble with friends. But it blew over quickly. Just a few days later, Dad took him to buy a new mountain bike, calling it a pick-me-up reward. As for me, even when I had good grades, I still had to take care of everything myself. Online college tuition, books, every single expense, all balanced from my part-time jobs. I once asked Mom why Dad had never given me a word of encouragement, not even a simple thank you. She only sighed. "You're the older sister, you have to set an example for Logan. Don't compare yourself to him. Everyone has their own role in the family." At those moments, I just wanted to scream that I needed to be seen too, that I wanted just once to be praised or even simply hugged by my parents the way they used to hug Logan when he was small. But those hugs, those questions about how I was doing, they always seemed to be reserved for my brother. I was an indispensable part of the family, but somehow no one ever really remembered me. I tried living up to expectations, being quiet, working hard, never asking for anything, never rebelling. But maybe that's exactly why I became invisible in my own house. In the family photos on the wall, Logan always stands in the center, Mom's hand on his shoulder while I hang back, smiling faintly, unnoticed. Every holiday, when friends would show off small gifts from their parents, I'd get an envelope with exactly the amount of money I'd given Mom to buy groceries. On birthdays, Mom always reminded me to call Grandma and Grandpa, invite them to Logan's birthday, while I'd receive a half-hearted happy birthday over dinner. Over the years, I learned to pour all my feelings into small things. I baked pastries every weekend, quietly setting aside a piece for each person, made breakfast for Logan on his finals, tidied up the house before every holiday. But all those efforts were just seen as the duties of a daughter, never anything worth praise. Sometimes I wondered if I was born just to be the background for Logan to shine, the person the whole family pinned their hopes on. Ashford might be a small city, but it was big enough to hold both dreams and wounds. I worked 2 jobs, came home after the city lights came on, and on long nights lying in bed, I'd hear my parents whispering about plans to buy Logan a new car, while I was just trying to figure out if I'd have enough to pay tuition that month. On the outside, we looked like the perfect family. On the inside, there was just a girl trying to survive, and no one really wanted to know what she was thinking or feeling. Those days dragged on, quiet and lingering like a drizzle outside the porch. I learned to hide my tears behind a smile, to tuck my dreams away behind Mom's reminders. Dad only cared about Logan's success. Mom just wanted Logan to be happy. And I was only loved as long as I fulfilled my role as the big sister. But the older I got, the more I realized there are things you can't redo, like the feeling of being recognized, of being loved unconditionally. Once, when Logan broke a promise to a friend and left him waiting in the cold because he had a party at home, Dad called me down the living room and said, "You're the older sister. You should have reminded him to keep his promise. That's your responsibility." That night, I lay awake wondering. With each passing day, I felt more and more keenly the thin line between myself and the rest of my family. Everything I did was just duty. My very existence, in my parents' eyes, was never important enough to really matter. Deep down, I knew the fire of injustice burning inside me would one day flare up. It's just that no one in my family had noticed it yet. When Logan entered his senior year of college, and the whole family's attention shifted even more toward him, I became even more determined to find my own path. Maybe it was because I was so used to relying on myself. The small wages from the cafe and the bookstore helped me save every little bit. I never dared to spend on myself. Every penny was carefully considered, from cheap lunches to the spools of copper wire I ordered online. The materials that became my very first bracelets, which I sold on my tiny Etsy shop. When I got my first order, from a customer all the way in Seattle, I held my phone with tears in my eyes, feeling for the first time in my life that someone actually valued something I had created. But that feeling I kept to myself. On weekends, when my parents took Logan to college events or gatherings of the elite parents, I'd sit by my bedroom window, late afternoon sunlight spilling across my desk, patiently bending each wire and setting each tiny stone. Sometimes Mom would stop by, glance in, and say, "Are you still messing around with those things? There's no future in that." Dad rarely asked about me as long as I paid the electric bill on time and didn't bother him during his online meetings in the study. He didn't care. At family dinners, I was just a shadow in a chair near the end of the table. Logan would talk about his research projects, the tough classes at college, or his summer internship in California that Dad had helped him get. Every little achievement of his was a reason for the whole family to celebrate. Mom would excitedly bake cakes, Dad would call the relatives to share the news. I'd listen and nod, even though my heart tightened every time I remembered that just last week I'd received a partial scholarship from my online university, a bit of good news I only dared to text to an old friend in Salem, knowing that if I mentioned it at dinner I'd only get Dad's indifferent shrug and Mom's sarcastic question, "Who doesn't take online classes? What's so special about that?" Once, I finally worked up the courage to tell everyone about the first jewelry order I'd sent all the way to Chicago. How I made my own packaging, went to the post office myself. Dad didn't look at me, just kept eating, while Mom gave a little laugh. "If you keep this up, you'll still be single when you're old, Ella." Logan gave me a polite smile, then changed the topic right away to the upcoming school festival, as if everything I said was meaningless. That night, as I cleared the table, I quietly washed the dishes, trying not to cry in front of Mom, because I knew my tears would never matter to anyone. At times like that, I'd remind myself to be stronger, to try even harder. I picked up extra early morning shifts at the cafe, squeezed in study time late at night after everyone else was asleep. I made a spreadsheet for all my expenses, every small amount carefully recorded. With each successful jewelry order, even if I only made a few dollars, I put a tiny part of it into a secret box under my bed, my freedom fund. Whenever I paused to breathe, looking out the window as the lights came on in the little town of Ashford, I felt both peaceful and lonely. I longed for someone to ask, just once, "Ella, how was your day?" But every day passed in chilling silence, filled only with Logan's music from the basement, Dad's keyboard chapping, Mom chatting on the phone with friends, bragging about her talented son. My existence became a habit no one bothered to notice. Gradually, I realized I no longer hoped for recognition from my parents. Every time I received an email confirming a new order, or when customers sent photos of themselves wearing my bracelets on Instagram, I felt a little warmth, even if it was just a sliver of sunshine. I learned to love myself through those small successes, through patience and self-reliance. I pictured the day I could finally leave this house, go to another city, live my own life without having to ask permission, without needing to explain, without fearing ridicule just for being different. But no matter how hard I tried to separate myself from everything, the feeling of exclusion still clung to me with every breath. One early winter evening, as I returned home from a late shift, I found the whole family gathered in the living room. They were planning Logan's graduation party, discussing the restaurant booking, the guest list, even the special dessert menu Mom had chosen just for him. No one asked if I wanted to give any input. No one asked how I would participate. I just stood at the doorway for a moment, then quietly went to my room, telling myself I was used to being left out. But the truth is, no one ever truly gets used to feeling like they don't belong, no matter how long they've endured it. Many times, I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering if I suddenly disappeared, who would notice first? If I left them a sign, would anyone really understand? Every night, those questions would come back, silent but heavy, leaving me hurt and aching. I kept telling myself that the time would come for things to change, whether that meant changing myself or finally leaving this place for good. Logan's graduation party was held on a Saturday night, just as Ashford was turning into summer. The house was filled with fresh flowers, blue and white balloons lined the hallways, and the scent of perfume mixed with barbecue and the cakes my mother had baked herself. Relatives, friends, my parents' colleagues, even people whose names I couldn't remember, all showed up, all beaming, showering Logan with their warmest congratulations. My brother stood in the center of the living room, hair slicked back, tailored suit fitting perfectly, wearing the confident smile of someone who's always been favored by the world. I helped my mother arrange cakes, clear glasses, and ran back and forth like a real waitress. Whenever guests arrived, I forced myself to smile, listening as one person after another praised Logan, occasionally receiving a polite greeting meant for me. In that moment, I realized I'd never once been the center of attention at any family party, not for my birthday, not for Christmas, not for New Year's. I was always the one in the background, helping, listening, nodding, never the main character in my own story. When the party reached its peak, my father raised his glass of wine and the noise in the living room fell silent. He looked around at everyone, his gaze landing on Logan, and in a deep, proud voice he declared, "Tonight, we're here to celebrate Logan Bennett, the pride of our family, who's graduated with honors, who has never disappointed his parents for a single day. Your mother and I are so proud of you, Logan." The room erupted in applause, every eye filled with admiration for my brother. Then Dad continued, pausing for effect as if to build suspense. "And we want to give you a special gift, something every hardworking graduate deserves. A brand new car." Out on the driveway, Logan shouted with excitement, and the guests poured outside, clapping and cheering as Dad pointed to the gleaming white Tesla Model 3 parked right in front of the house. "Do you like it?" Dad asked, and Logan, unable to hide his joy, hugged both our parents as laughter and applause echoed across the neighborhood. I stood quietly on the porch, watching everyone crowd around my brother. The hugs, the cheers, and I was nothing more than a faded shadow in the background. Mom walked by, smiling, and whispered, "Ella, can you pour some more water for the guests?" I nodded, swallowing my sadness, and continued my silent role as always. Near the end of the party, after most of the guests had left, Dad called me into the living room. He sat back on the sofa, his face serious, with Mom beside him, hands clasped. I knew something was wrong, my heart pounded in my chest. Dad didn't mince words. "You're a near adult now. Starting next month, you'll need to pay rent." I stared at him, a cold chill running down my spine. "I'm still in college," I replied softly. "I'm still contributing around the house, still helping Mom, still working 2 jobs. Dad cut me off with his familiar furrowed brow, his voice firm. "Logan's a son, he needs to focus on his career. This house, your mom and I bought it to reward him when he graduates. It's what he deserves. But you need to learn to be independent. No one can support you forever." I turned to Mom, hoping for some trace of sympathy, but she only sighed. "Your father's right, Ella. At your age, I was already taking care of myself." I bit my lip to hold back tears, trying to keep my composure, but inside, everything was shattering. On the very day my brother received the biggest gift of his life, I was handed a rent bill by my own family. I walked back to my room, my head buzzing, the laughter and voices of Logan and his friends outside, echoing my loneliness and insignificance in the house that once felt like home. That night, I skipped dinner, lying silent in my room, listening to Logan's car start up and pull away. I thought about all my effort and sacrifices through the years. Every small thing I'd done to keep this house tidy, every late night shift, every word of encouragement for my brother. All of it now worthless. The only value they saw in me was $900, 0 cents a month, as if my very existence needed to be paid for to be allowed in this family. When darkness covered the town, I sat by the window, the yellow streetlight glowing on walls lined with memories. For the first time, I no longer wanted to hold on to anything here. There was a sharp, cold feeling at that moment. I knew this was when I truly began to leave my family. Even if my body was still in that little room, my heart had already gone. I couldn't sleep at all. Every sound in the house seemed amplified, waves of coldness filling my room. The shadows of trees outside flickered on the wall, swaying like hands knocking softly on old memories. I curled up under my blanket, tangled in thoughts, anger turning to sorrow, hope giving way to despair, stared at the blurred ceiling through tears, struggling to understand how, with a single decision from my parents, everything I'd ever valued or believed about love could shatter so quickly. My whole life, I'd done everything right. I remembered being 16, walking home in the rain from a friend's house because Logan was busy driving his friends around and Mom was on the phone ordering his birthday cake. Every childhood memory felt like a shard of glass cutting into my palm. The more I remembered, the deeper the pain, the colder I felt. I wondered if I kept staying, kept doing these invisible things for them, would anything ever change? Or would I forever be a shadow, living on their pity, paying rent just to exist in the place once called family? The night dragged on, each tick of the clock heavy as I tortured myself. Am I useless? Am I selfish? Are my parents right? Early in the morning, while Logan was returning home to the gentle hum of his new car, I had already been up for hours. I sat at my desk, beside my spending notebook, a little box of handmade jewelry, and an unsent letter to my best friend in Salem. I gazed at the things I'd once cherished, and suddenly they felt foreign. I understood then that I no longer belonged here, not because I wanted to leave, but because staying had become nothing more than an empty obligation. They needed me to keep the house tidy, to ensure there was always food on the table, to pay my share of the bills. But who actually needed Ella? The person, the daughter, with a heart full of scars and small hopes. The next night, I lay quietly watching moonlight filter through the curtains, listening to the rustle of leaves. I knew that if I kept waiting for someone to love me, my life would always be nothing more than silent summers passing by the window. Quietly, I got up and rummaged for my oldest backpack, the one I'd never used because I'd never gone anywhere far. I packed only the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my old laptop, my jewelry box, a small journal, and some carefully hidden savings. I didn't cry. It was time for me to go, not because I'd lost, but to save myself from this invisible swamp. Before sunrise, I sat one last time at the kitchen table, once the center of every family meal. I took a blank sheet of paper and started writing not a goodbye, but an indictment of every wound I'd ever endured. I wrote about every time I was ignored. Every day I worked myself to exhaustion, only to be met with a dismissive shake of the head. Every dollar I contributed to the house that no one ever acknowledged. I described every tiny sacrifice, every time I wiped my own tears and smiled again just to avoid bothering anyone. I didn't blame them, I just wrote the truth, clear and cold as an account statement. I tried my best, but no one ever saw. If tomorrow you look for me, remember, no warning, no phone call, no text. I quietly left the Bennett house at dawn, while everyone else slept in their warm beds. I walked to the bus station in the cold morning mist, feeling both hollow and strangely light inside. I bought a one-way ticket to Salem, a city not too far, but far enough for a new start, where I had a friend who once told me her door would always be open if I ever needed help. I didn't look back. With every step away from Ashford, I left behind broken expectations, harsh judgments, and even the unnamed pain I'd carried for years. This was the beginning of a new journey, a journey to reclaim my worth and my true self, no longer just a shadow in what was supposed to be my home. Salem greeted me with a light morning drizzle, cold enough to make me shiver, yet I felt like a new seedling breaking through the soil, fragile but eager to live. The bus station in the city's outskirts was quiet. I dragged my heavy backpack past rows of old wooden benches, watching unfamiliar people hurry homeward. In my heart, I carried only one address. The small apartment of Olivia, my best friend from high school, the only person who'd ever asked, "Ella, if you ever need to go somewhere, promise you'll call me first." I never thought I'd have to call, but it was that early morning call, just 2 words, "Can I come?" that saved me from the depths of despair. Olivia welcomed me with a tight hug at the doorstep, a warm smile, and a cup of hot tea waiting on the kitchen table. Her apartment was small but full of sunlight, the scent of toast and jazz music playing softly, soothing my broken heart. We said little, just exchanged glances that told me here I was allowed to be quiet, to breathe, to be vulnerable without fear of judgment. In those first days in Salem, I lived like someone lost from their old world, bewildered, cautious, but filled with hope. I sent out job applications to a little cafe bookshop on Main Street, where the owner, Mrs. Moore, preferred people who listened to customers' stories rather than making small talk. She asked about my work experience. I told her I'd made coffee, cleaned tables, sold old books back in Ashford. She smiled. "That's enough. Here, all you need is to be diligent and honest." For the first time, I felt a simple trust, unconditional. No expectations, no comparisons. I threw myself into work, savoring the early mornings when I opened the shop before the town was fully awake, watching sunlight filter through dusty bookshelves, listening to the bell tinkle as regulars stepped in to order their usual. Each day, I got to talk with people who knew nothing about my parents, who held no expectations for me except a friendly smile and a perfectly made cappuccino. My first modest paychecks in Salem didn't make me rich, but they gave me a sense of agency, the freedom to choose my own path. At night, returning to the little room Olivia let me rent for next to nothing, I would sit by the window and open my grandmother's old journal. My grandma, Evelyn Carter, was the only woman who'd ever looked me straight in the eyes and said, "No one has the right to define you except yourself." In those time-stained pages, she wrote about her youth, about building her own bakery business even when my grandfather objected, about loneliness, and the courage to stand up for herself after being belittled again and again. Between the diary pages were letters, financial statements, and scraps of paper with curious notes. "Scholarship fund for Ella. Don't tell anyone except the lawyer." Those notes piqued my curiosity and gnawed at me. I talked to Olivia about them and asked for her help tracking down information about the scholarship fund and any assets my grandmother had mentioned. Olivia introduced me to one of her friends, Mason, a young lawyer specializing in family estates. Mason agreed to help me review the papers and contact the law firm where my grandmother used to work. The process was slow, but each day I uncovered more about my own family, the meticulous care my grandmother took, the worries she poured into her small savings accounts, the secrets my parents never told me. Alongside the process of reclaiming what was rightfully mine, I gradually realized freedom wasn't just about leaving Ashford, but about learning to love myself, accepting my scars, and letting myself grow up. For the first time in years, I had time to breathe deeply, to read a romance novel without fearing anyone's judgment, to make a few extra pairs of earrings and bracelets for new customers in Salem, and post pictures online. Regulars at the book cafe started asking about my jewelry. Some even requested custom orders. The feeling of being recognized slowly returned, not because of who my parents were, but because people truly liked what I created. One cold, rainy afternoon, Mason called, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Ella, I found information about a trust fund your grandmother set up just for you. It's still intact, and your parents were never allowed to touch it." I was stunned, a rush of justice and relief flooding my chest, as if the universe had finally returned something I should have received long ago. I thanked Mason, tears falling before I realized. But this time, they were tears of hope, of freedom, of a new belief that I could finally build the life I dreamed of without anyone's permission. To me now, Salem is a city of new beginnings, small, peaceful, but wide enough for dreams, for the rebirth of someone who once felt lost. I still remember Ashford, the house draped in ivy, and those rainy summer days. But that longing no longer suffocates me, because I know I have truly turned the page into a chapter of independence, of healing, and of the faith that self-worth is something you reclaim for yourself. The first message came while I was standing behind the espresso bar, clumsily working the milk frother, my mind still lingering on ideas for a new bracelet set for a regular customer. It was a string of unfamiliar numbers, the message urgent and cold, lacking any warmth or genuine concern. "Ella, Mom's been calling you non-stop. Come home immediately. Logan's in trouble." I read it again and again, a vague emotion rising in me. All these years, calls from my family were always commands. Only when they needed something did my name suddenly appear at the top of their priority list. I tucked my phone away, forcing myself to get back to work, but the chatter in the cafe began to fade behind the echo of old memories. That evening, Olivia found me curled up on the sofa, clutching my knees, eyes fixed on my phone. 30 missed calls from Mom, a few scattered texts from Dad, even a number from Aunt Lisa whom I hadn't spoken to in years. All of them revolved around Logan. It turned out my brother had been arrested for driving under the influence, causing a minor accident in downtown Ashford. Logan wasn't hurt, but the incident quickly became the talk of the town, a stain on the reputation my parents had spent years building. With everyone focused on the scandal, I was suddenly the one they needed most, the only one who could heal the family, as my mother pleaded, or at the very least, serve as the excuse to restore their idea of normalcy. I hesitated, torn between pity, concern, and an anger I couldn't even name. How many times had I been the last resort when everything at home fell apart? How many times had I been summoned back, just to be the shield for a family already rotting from the inside? But this time, I couldn't completely turn away. I thought about Logan, the kid who used to stuff bread into my backpack before tests, who would quietly apologize when Mom scolded me for his mistakes. I knew, even though Logan had never truly taken my side, deep down he was still just a child swept up in our parents' whirlpool of expectations and pressure. After many restless nights, I decided to return to Ashford, not to reconcile nor to save the family's reputation, but to face the final darkness in my heart. The day I returned, the old house seemed to shrink before my eyes, ivy now covering much of the porch Mom once trimmed every week. The air was suffocating, everything inside was messy, cold, as if the house itself was tired from keeping up the perfect facade for too long. Mom rushed out and hugged me, her arms trembling. "You're home, thank God." Dad only nodded, dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights. I asked about Logan directly. Mom's voice cracked. "He's still at the station, needs a family member to bail him out. The police won't accept bail over the phone. Your dad, he's very stressed." I looked at him, feeling none of the warmth, only the shadow of the man who'd terrified me throughout my childhood. Only when I agreed to go to the police station with Mom did she finally stop crying. Logan sat huddled inside, pale, hair a mess, eyes swollen. When he saw me, he stammered, "I'm sorry, Ella, I let everyone down." I saw in his eyes real regret, nothing left of the arrogant little brother from before. I sat across from him, not just because of the accident. I said quietly, but because of everything else. "You know better than anyone, don't you?" Logan lowered his head, his voice shaking. "I know about the scholarship fund. I know Dad took it for my tuition. I know Mom was in on it." I was scared that if I said anything, things would get even worse. "I messed up, Ella. But I always felt like I was just a pawn in their plans. They mapped out my path, my fate, told me I had to be their pride." After listening to him, my anger faded into something I couldn't quite name, half pity, half relief. Logan wasn't the only villain in this story. He, too, was just a victim of a warped web of expectations, of conditional love, of secrets and manipulation passed down through generations. In that moment, I realized I was no longer trapped in silence, pity, or resentment. I wasn't the weak girl who cried in silence because of injustice anymore. I had changed, and it was time to choose the truth, and choose myself. After signing the bail papers for Logan, I left the police station, not going back to the old house, but heading straight to the Central Park, where I once dreamed of a life untethered to anyone but myself. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Dad, Mom, the whole family trying to pull me back into the role of the one who fixed everything. But I knew now that coming back wasn't about returning to how things were, but about confronting everything left unsaid, and firmly drawing the final boundary between myself and the old patterns I never wanted to carry forward. That night, I rented a room at a small hotel near the park instead of returning to the family house. In the darkness of that unfamiliar room, I lay awake thinking about what I was about to face. No longer was I afraid of the old fears, being misunderstood, being punished, not being enough. This time I carried a new strength. A strength that came from no one but myself, from freedom, from the recognition I had found in Salem and the people who truly saw me. The next morning, I arranged to meet my parents and Mason, the lawyer, at a law office in Ashford. When I walked in, both parents were already there. My father's face cold and slightly arrogant as always, my mother's exhaustion and anxiety clear as day. They didn't ask how I was, just waited for me to speak first. I sat down and laid out the documents Mason had helped me gather. Proof of the trust fund my grandmother had created just for me, money transfers, evidence that my father had withdrawn the funds without consent, misused them, and even forged my signature to redirect part of the fund to Logan's tuition. Mason calmly presented each piece of evidence, his voice steady but never harsh. My father tried to argue, saying he only wanted to manage things for his children's best interests, that I didn't understand the pressures of being a parent, that everything was for the family. But this time, I didn't let him steer the conversation into the familiar dead end. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm an adult. I know the difference between fairness and selfishness. I don't blame you for spoiling Logan, but I can't accept you taking away my autonomy, stealing what Grandma left for me. You can't build a family on lies and manipulation." My mother broke down in tears, trying to explain that she was caught in the middle, that she just wanted peace. But I made it clear, you watched everything happen and never protected me. You cared more about pleasing Dad than about losing your daughter. Now, I'm choosing to stand up for myself, even if it means walking alone. Mason handed my parents a formal notice. I was suing to reclaim my inheritance, demanding Dad repay every cent he took, with interest. I stated, "I don't need anything else from you, only your acknowledgement that I was treated unfairly, that I was worthy of Grandma's trust. If you have any honor left, apologize publicly and end this cycle of manipulation now." The air in the room was heavy as lead. Dad, for once, didn't shout. He just sat there in silence, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. My mother sobbed, but this time I didn't feel guilty or weak. I realized it was finally time to stop carrying the burden of this family's tragedies. Everyone would have to answer for their own choices. Walking out of the law office, I felt as if 100 heavy burdens had been lifted from my shoulders. I sent Mason a message of thanks not just for justice, but because he had helped me reclaim my self-respect. Then I called Olivia, my voice trembling not from fear, but because for the first time I was truly free from the invisible strings that had bound me for so many years. That afternoon I stopped by the jail to see Logan one last time before leaving Ashford. He looked at me, guilt written all over his face, wanting to apologize but unable to find the words. I simply said, "You have to decide your own life, Logan. Don't let anyone, not even our parents, live it for you anymore." He nodded. That night, I left Ashford with a new spirit. No longer a girl who only knew how to endure, but a woman who dared to speak the truth, to claim what she deserved, and, most importantly, to draw her own boundaries, choosing herself without fear, without needing anyone's permission. After that confrontation at the law office, I returned to Salem with a strange mix of relief and emptiness, as if I'd finally shed a suit of armor I'd worn since childhood. The legal battle dragged on through the autumn, sometimes leaving me exhausted to the point of tears. But for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I had Mason, I had Olivia, colleagues at the bookstore who checked in and encouraged me, and even strangers, customers sending congratulatory messages when they heard I'd stood up for myself. Each day, I learned a little more about courage, about the value of drawing boundaries and defending my rights, even when the opposition was my own flesh and blood. Eventually, the court declared that the trust fund my grandmother left was legally mine. Every cent my father had used had to be repaid in full. He quietly stepped down from his company while Mom moved in with Aunt Lisa in a small southern town, starting her own journey of healing. After all that happened, Logan abandoned the success plans our parents had for him and instead signed up for carpentry school in another city, living and taking responsibility for himself for the first time. As for me, instead of using my inheritance solely for myself, I partnered with Mason and Olivia to open a small creative space in the heart of Salem, a jewelry studio and a place where young women hurt by family could learn life skills and rebuild. I realized that gratitude for life isn't about denying past pain, but about using it to build something better for the future. More than once, I heard stories even harsher than my own, and each time I believed even more deeply. A person's true value isn't where they were born, but how bravely they choose themselves after falling. That spring, I officially launched my first jewelry collection, called New Roots. The collection quickly caught the community's attention, not only for its craftsmanship, but for the story behind it. A girl cast out by her own family, rising to independence and inspiring others. On the store's website, I wrote, "No one should have to pay just to stay in the house of their childhood. But if you ever did, remember you still deserve a place to belong, even if it's not the old house, but the strong heart you build for yourself." A year later, I returned to Ashford not as a resident, but as a guest, when the old Bennett house was donated and transformed into a support center for women and children who had survived family violence. I stood before the ivy-covered house, watching people come and go, listening to the laughter of children ringing across the lawn, and my heart tightened not with pain, but with pride. Now it was a haven, a place of new beginnings for so many others. My mother joined a psychological support group for middle-aged women, while my father, I heard, lived quietly in a small apartment, no longer trying to control anyone but himself. I still keep in touch with Logan, though we're not as close as we once were, but every conversation carries a lightness and sincerity in his voice. We don't have to forgive everything from the past, just understand that each of us has our own journey to adulthood, our own boundaries to set so that we don't hurt each other anymore. My new life is peaceful and full in a very different way. In the mornings, I make coffee, open the shop, chat with customers, teach young women how to make bracelets, share my story, and listen to their small dreams. Sometimes I sit quietly watching sunlight dance across the wooden table, reminding myself that I have truly become myself. If you're watching this story and have ever felt invisible or been hurt by those you love most, remember, you are not alone. One day you'll find the courage to stand up, to redraw your boundaries, to build your own home for your soul, and to turn every wound into motivation to grow. Sometimes you have to leave to be seen, to lose in order to rediscover your true worth, and on that journey you deserve love, freedom, and the pride of having survived. If you've ever felt the way I did, please share your story in the comments below. Here, no one is invisible, no one is left behind. Only people